All right, I'm here with Jack Kruse right now. Jack is a neurosurgeon. He's a brilliant guy. The reason I like him is because he's an out-of-the-box thinker. He has a very first principles attitude, which I like very much, which is he looks at the basic physics of it, the electrons, the protons, and it's something that I feel like I can, it's a different perspective for me. 2 years ago, I happened to think, most of it was BS, but now I'm starting to become somewhat of a believer in this approach. My own experience is that I recently bought a magnetico, and that was based on Dr. Kruse's recommendation, and my sleep improved dramatically. I have my own biological theories of what's going on, and I'd like to see his perspective on the quantum aspects of it. My first question is, why are people affected by this so differently? You have some people that I feel like are doing everything wrong, and they seem to be fine. You got like the guys like Warren Buffett, Elon Musk. These guys are living in EMF hellholes. Elon Musk sleeps 6 hours. He's chronically stressed. You have people like Warren Buffett is drinking 6 Cokes a day. So you have people that are doing everything wrong, and the question is, how do you explain that the fact that they're doing everything wrong and they're still functioning seemingly very well?
Well, that's the key point. You're assuming that they're functioning A-OK or very well. You're not the doctor. You don't know what they're dealing with. And
that's true.
The key thing that you need to also realize is that the reason why this is different amongst all people is that everybody's environment that they allow their mitochondria to sense will really dictate their results. So here's the key. If you want to deplete your stem cells, the good thing about humans is that we have more mitochondrial density than every other animal on this planet. And most of that mitochondrial density is based in 3 structures: the brain, the heart, and the immune system. I would flip the question around to you directly. I'd like you to explain to me why the major 3 diseases that kill humans are heart disease, neurodegeneration, and now autoimmune disease that have exploded since guys like Buffett and Elon Musk have come onto the scene in the last 50 to 60 years. See, we didn't have those diseases prior to that. So your question, while maybe trying to be provocative, actually opens up a door to probably a better question. I don't believe that Buffett is very healthy. He's actually had quite a few medical problems in the last year that have been documented. I also personally think that he talks about drinking Coke because he owns a shitload of Coke stock. So let's be honest. And Elon Musk, this is actually a funny one you brought up. I just recently gave a talk in Los Angeles to a small group of guys called the Society International. And as soon as I came off the plane at LAX, I had a trimeter with me, and I went into a Tesla dealership because there's not a Tesla dealership here in New Orleans. And I walked in with a trimeter, and they would not even let me sit in the car. And, they're trained to answer questions from people about this. They were not ready for Jack Kruse. And it was very, very interesting. All I'll say is, getting really down to the nitty gritty, I don't want anybody to accept the things that I tell you. I want you to biohack them and test them. But here's where I completely disagree with most people. I don't believe that biology is a fundamental science. I believe physics is a fundamental science that explains the things that happen in biology. So it's incumbent on the person to understand truly what I'm saying. We need to understand how the physical forces unify and come together to form the structures in biology that we all know. I think everybody who's into health, wellness, or just trying to keep out of doctors' offices know about the basic things in biology, but what they don't know is what underpins those basic things. And that's really my focus. I'm not interested in getting into a pissing contest with people about macronutrient ratios because I fundamentally realize that foods and macronutrients aren't important. It's the electrons and protons that come from those foods that are important.
Right. So I have 3 things to say. First of all, I completely agree that we do have a wave of autoimmune disease, a whole bunch of problems, chronic disease. And my point wasn't that oh, this what you're saying is not true. It's just that it's just a curiosity that there are those, one in even if they're pretty rare, those Elon Musks, the Warren Buffetts. So you're right. He has problems now, but he's lived till what he's about 80 to 85, and he's
Well,
lived a
think about
decent
the
life.
first 50 years of his life. Was he around any of the things that you are? How old are you?
I'm 28, but that's a
Well,
very good point. Yeah,
yeah, there's the key. And remember
I
that
agree.
the point that people forget is that what people have sensed in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, even the 70s, it's radically different than what's happened since 95.
Okay.
When 95 came, that's when the internet went from hardwired to Wi-Fi, and it's when all cell phones became bidirectional microwave devices. In other words, only the rich people before you were born, I grew up in New York City, so I can remember this. Only rich people had microwave ovens in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s. Now, guys your age don't even understand that because a microwave oven, you can go to Best Buy and cost you like 89 bucks. Well, that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the case, back when, Buffett was in his heyday in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The point that I would make is, and I always say this to the people on my forum, and I'm going to say it to you, you have to have the appropriate context. And you know what? I find people below the age of 30, 35 have no context because you guys grew up in a completely different world
Mm-hmm.
than I did. I mean, I'm 50 years old, and Buffett's older than me. Musk is probably around the same age I am, maybe a little bit younger. But you have to realize where you live and what you're around kind of dictates the environment that your mitochondria senses. And what I like to tell people, so they understand this without the crazy science, I like to give them the analogy of a direct TV dish. Most people have had the experience of having a direct TV dish, and when they have thunderstorms like we've got right now in New Orleans, and they're watching the NFL game, the game gets wiped off the TV. Everybody says, okay, that makes sense. Well, that means there's excess energies in the environment, and that's able to do that. How do those signals work? Those signals work the same way that electromagnetic radiation works in you. So your personal thunderstorm can wipe off the program that's built into your mitochondria that handles electrons and protons. So your personal thunderstorm dictates the way you can handle electrons from food. It's really important. Then when you take it to the next level, which is where I think the biggest risk for modern humans is blue light. And the reason why blue light, which is also the number one non-native EMF that's out there, blue light radically affects how mitochondria work. And this is an effect that no one seems to realize. But if do a PubMed search or just look, even superficially, you're going to find that the data that's out there is incredible. The problem is no one is connecting the dots and explaining it to people so that when they go to their primary care doctor, they're starting to realize that carbohydrates fundamentally are a problem for diabetics, but they're not the problem.
Right. So yeah, I that's why I'm interviewing you, because I really like that you're explaining, you're really piecing things together, and I completely agree that the biology does not really explain things on a fundamental level. It's really the physics. And my what I do research I do it in the biology, and that's why it's really important to take a more first principles approach and study the physics. Now, how does psychological stress fit into electrons and quantum theory?
That's pretty simple. Anything that's a stressor, whether it be metabolic, emotional, biologic, everything affects the paraventricular nucleus in the brainstem. And what is that for your listeners who don't know? It's a nucleus in the brainstem that controls the sympathetic outflow. There's two systems in the brain. One's parasympathetic, the other one's sympathetic. Parasympathetic is the one that calms things down. It's basically the rest and digest part of the brain. And the other side of the brain, which is the sympathetic side, is the one that we have a problem with when it becomes with non-native EMF. What does that mean? It releases calcium. Calcium efflux is how that starts. It's the major second messenger in neurons. When that happens, neurons get turned on. We have a chronic stress response. So you can get a chronic stress response not only from your job, your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, but you can actually get it from a cell tower that's close to your house. You can get it from the 60 hertz signal that's in your bedroom right now. You can get it from a variety of different things. And are there scientists who've already done these physics experiments through some very, very slick testing called ion cyclotron resonance that have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that even low electric and magnetic fields can cause calcium efflux? The answer is yes. The problem is no one's reading what they've written. And this will shock you since you're 28. The guy whose book, in my view, is the treaty on this is a guy named A.S. Pressman. It was published in 1970. Dr. Andrew Marino is a physicist who was Robert O. Becker's right-hand man, took it further and wrote a book called Going Somewhere that documents exactly what all this stuff was and what the state of the science was and what happened in New York City about power lines that went from New York City up to Ontario to Niagara Falls in 1977 that basically caused Dr. Becker, who was twice nominated for the Nobel Prize, to basically lose his funding from the NIH in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And he retired at 56 years old. And just so you know, because I know you may not know this, the reason I'm very well acquainted with Dr. Becker's work, he was an orthopedic surgeon at SUNY Syracuse, okay? And I happen to be a neurosurgeon. I'm a spine surgeon. Well, Dr. Becker, his world-famous research was on bone physiology. He was the guy that figured out that bone doesn't heal. It actually regenerates. It's one of the only tissues left in humans that still has the same ability that's found in amphibians. And it works on the photoelectric effect, piezoelectricity. And he, in 1963, if you can believe this, wrote a paper in Nature that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that bone is a semiconductor. When I was in residency in the late 80s and early 90s, his work was required reading for us in residency. And I have to be honest with you, you know, this is after medical school and actually a lot of training. I had never heard of this. And when I read these papers, I was like, how in the hell did I get through medical school and never hear that bone was a semiconductor and that worked on a P and N junction and all this? And it just never stopped me. And when I went through my transformation 10 years ago, that's when it dawned on me that Becker's work was critical in understanding kind of what was going on. Because if you understand that one system works on semiconduction, you understand that semiconduction can be affected by non-native electric and magnetic fields, then you as a clinician need to realize that you just found the canary in the coal mine for humans. And 10 years ago, I started realizing that everybody that walked into my clinic had some form of either osteopenia or osteoporosis. And I was like, wait a minute, how can everybody on the planet have this problem, even though they don't have the classic risk factors that doctors talk about? And that's how I went down the rabbit hole that I went down. And I realized that it has to do with the change in the physics of our environment. Humans have changed the overall physics of our environment. And they've changed it in a variety of different ways. It's not just one way. It's kind of like, the best way to describe it, it's kind of like a slow erosion of the mammalian battery from a multi-directional approach. And that's where we are now in 2015. And I grew up in a world very different than you. I didn't have any of this stuff. The only thing that we had to deal with back then was the 60 hertz system, you know, some power lines in New York. But we didn't have cell phones when I was young. We had TVs, but most of them were black and white.
Right.
You know, so it was a different time. I personally think that your generation is going to get sicker faster from more serious diseases than any other generation in history. And if you talk to any physician right now, they will tell you that the acuity rate of people coming through a primary care doctor's office and my office has changed dramatically. I've seen this in my own career. There is not a surgeon I haven't talked to that doesn't have my perspective. The problem is none of them understand why. And see, I decided to be a little bit more curious, try to figure out why it was going on.
Right. So, 100%. I agree that the world is definitely changing. I'm seeing, just everybody's really come down with a variety of issues. They're having energy problems. So, Yeah, what I see is that people, a lot of times, like a lot of problems comes after a large bout of psychological stress. And so you're saying that that has to do with calcium efflux. And I've actually done some research on it, and you're right that EMFs do cause calcium efflux based on some animal studies that I've read. Is that the mechanism by which it destroys mitochondrial function, the calcium efflux?
Well, it's one of the ways. There's a lot of other ways. It depends on what we're talking about, whether it's the electric field or the magnetic field or a combination of both. But I'll give you the flip side of a non-native EMF, how it does it even quicker. Blue light actually destroys melatonin in your brain. When melatonin goes down, the other thing that happens that's very important is you lose DHA in cell membranes everywhere in mammals. So why is this important? Again, this ties directly to Becker's work. Becker found that in salamander, just about every animal, including humans and plants. So I want you to realize we're talking about major coverage here in terms of things that are alive, that the DC electric current is directly tied to regeneration in plants and animals, amphibians, salamanders, you name it. Well, when you have no DHA in your cell membranes, what do you lose? You lose voltage. How can you, my friend, or any person listening to this, go get this checked very easily? Go get an EKG, go get an EEG. You're going to notice that the voltage decreases when you have whatever stressor you think you have. Problem is, are doctors doing those types of tests? Yes, but are they linking them to your environment? The answer is no. They don't understand how that linkage happens, okay? But that linkage happens via DHA. What is DHA special about? Most people know DHA is fish oil. DHA is concentrated in every eukaryotic membrane. As you go further along the evolutionary tree to us, we have 3 pounds of it in our central and peripheral nervous system. So we're designed to concentrate it. The other thing that's interesting about humans is we don't make it endogenously. In other words, we have to eat it, okay? And taking a pill doesn't obviate that risk. It has to be in your brain. Here's where it gets interesting.
Wait a second. We don't make it. I thought we converted it from alpha linolenic acid.
No, humans have hardly any ability to do that. And that research has been published for probably 30 to 35 years. And the world expert on that is a guy named Michael Crawford and Stephen Cunane. They've written books and multiple articles on it. One of the only mammals that has the ability to make a lot of DHA endogenously, which is part of the reason why I eat it, is lamb. Okay? But not all mammals have this ability. Humans really don't have it. And that's one of the big vegetarian myths, that they think you can eat flaxseed and make DHA. Not true. Completely not true. Getting back to the DHA story, why is DHA fundamentally linked to this DC current of regeneration? DHA is the only lipid in 600 million years of eukaryotic evolution that is able to turn sunlight into a DC electric current and vice versa. It can turn a DC electric current back into sunlight. Now, why is this important? Where is DHA highest in humans? In your eye. Why would it be highest in your eye versus your brain? What goes through your eye, my friend? Sunlight.
Photons.
Right, exactly, sunlight. And what sits right above your 2 optic nerves where they cross, in the geographic center of your head? It's called optochiasm. There's this little thing called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And what does that control? Controls circadian biology, okay? And why does your suprachiasmatic nucleus require a higher level of DHA in your eyes? Very simply, and this goes right to physics, because it has to run faster than all the other clocks in your body. Why is that? Let's stop for a minute. Here's where we take a physics detour. Almost everybody listening to this knows about Garmin devices and GPS devices. Everybody's got one on their iPhone. So how do they work fundamentally? If you look up right now outside your window, wherever you live, you'll see that there's devices, satellites that have atomic clocks in it. They have to run 38 microseconds faster to run the devices that are on the surface of this planet. Why is that? Because gravity bends light, okay? That's the fundamental physical reason it has to happen, okay? It's called gravitational lensing. So if you didn't account for that, and the clocks that were in orbit didn't run 38 microseconds faster, you would be off by 10 kilometers on the surface. So how good would your iPhone or your GPS device be, in getting you from point A to point B? Not very good. Now let's take it back to you. Why does your eye have to have more DHA? Because the clock in your head has to run faster than the clock in your liver, the clock in your feet, the clock everywhere else in your body. Why? Because biochemistry will be off. You'll develop chaos. What happens when arrivals and deliveries in a cell come at the same time versus being yoked in a proper fashion? We call that chaos. What's another name for that? A synonym is called inflammation. What does inflammation got? Inflammation has a positive charge. What does DC electric current filled with? Negative charge. How do you get rid of positive charge? With a negative charge. Hence, this is how it links directly to Becker's work. And the problem is, people don't realize, to take this even further, to prove to you that I might be right, do you know that in front of every single mammalian gene in the genome, there's a circadian clock gene called Pier 1 and Pier 2? You know why that's the case? Because that supracosmatic nucleus has to yoke gene expression via those two clock genes. And the thing is, biology has known this for literally 25, 30 years. They just have no clue how it works. And here's the irony. Every single one of you listening to this can fact check how a GPS device works. It works exactly the same in you. The problem is you don't have a clue how it works in you. And when you begin to understand that blue light destroys DHA in your eye, that's why melatonin drops. So what does that mean? It means that your clock in your supracosmatic nucleus cannot run faster than the one in your liver. And when that happens, you get a disease called diabetes.
Interesting. I've noticed that probably half of the people I deal with have problems with their eyes hurt when they look at bright light. And I'm assuming, based on what you're describing, that has to do with a DHA deficiency in the eye. And then I'll ask you, well...
I would stop you there.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't have to do with that. It has to do with excessive blue light.
Yeah, but that's because they're not having enough DHA.
Well, here's where it gets interesting. You have to look at this as an equation. You can live in a blue light world if you eat like a great white shark. Now, my day job as a neurosurgeon. No one lives in more blue light than I do. Why is it that I don't have the problems that I should have based on the theories that I publish out on my blog?
Because you eat a lot of DHA.
Right, but I also limit my blue light exposure the days that I'm not in surgery. I do things radically different.
Do you wear red glasses to limit your...
I do.
In the daytime as well, though?
Yes, I do many different things to mitigate my personal thunderstorm. It gets back to what I told you earlier. You have to assess your personal thunderstorm and what your life requires, and then you build your biohack and how you're going to live your life from that standpoint. So when you have big risk, that means you have to do more. You have to be more aggressive. When you don't, then you can change the mix.
All right. The question is, I've thought about doing this, like wearing red glasses in the daytime, but the problem is I was always afraid that I'm going to ruin my circadian rhythm, because you need blue light in the daytime to set those clock genes.
You only need the blue light in the beginning of the morning. That's it.
I see.
If you were following the leptin prescription, what does it tell you to do? As soon as you wake up, you go outside, not behind glass, not behind those glasses you're wearing, and let the sunlight hit your retina for about 1 to 3 minutes. What does that do? It tells your brain the sun just rose. After that, it becomes an endogenous clock. It doesn't need constant light. It's one-time effect. But as soon as you wake up, within 30 minutes, you need to get outside naked and let the sun hit you. Now, where you live, it looks like you live someplace in the city. That's probably not going to work too good. But that's the stuff that I do.
I still do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I would just tell you that that's how it works. Once that clock is set, the brain takes over the internal clock mechanism, and then things can happen from there.
That's very good information.
Yeah, the real thing that you got to worry about with with the glasses during the day is that they can make you sleepy. So if I recommend no one drives with the glasses because it'll raise your melatonin level. But I would only tell people to do that if they have extreme blue light issues. And the way to know that is you have to biohack your own environment. Most people don't know that. The guys on my site do because they do that all the time. They've been learning with me for 4 or 5 years how to do that. And then they make the appropriate adjustments based on their own biohacks to figure out what, in effect, they have to do to protect themselves.
Okay, quick question. I have a bright light device actually here. You see, so I'm assuming you're not going to like it but there is research that, the bright light.
Don't assume anything because you're making a bad assumption.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah.
Because bright light does have a role, but you're missing the point. Just by your questions you're asking me, you're not thinking correctly.
All right.
Okay? Bright light has a role. It has to be in a circadian role. Okay? The problem is you're trying to replace fake artificial bright light with sunlight because you live in a very bad place. Mm-hmm. Okay? You're not willing to give up what you need to give up. And that's the reason why the research has shown that those bright lights can help. The problem is if they're not applied appropriately, it can throw your circadian rhythm off. And that's what we're starting to see. The best data out there for bright light therapy is for SAD, which is,
seasonal affective disorder.
Exactly. And that's where it plays a role. Here's the key. That disease doesn't affect many people. What's the major circadian mismatch disease we have today? Alzheimer's disease and type 2 diabetes. Also autoimmune disease. Now, how many people have that compared to SAD? So why do you want to focus in on something that's not important instead of something that really is important? See, I look at it like this. I go after the big diseases. Why? Because that's going to have the biggest benefit to my species. And the only way you're going to understand this is understanding the context of how to use these physical factors.
Okay. You made some very good points. Now, I have a question about, you speak a lot about DHA and oxygen. Now, the way you explain it is, and this is certainly very true, that you have in your mitochondria, your inner membrane, you have a electron flow, and you say that that's important to have a very good electron flow so that your magnetic field is much stronger. And the reason why you want your magnetic field to be strong, or at least two big reasons, is to attract DHA and O2, which are paramagnetic, and so that's attracted to the mitochondria. Did I get that right or no?
Close. I mean, it's close. It's good enough. It's good enough for the people to understand. So, what's the question related to that?
Well, no. So, is that what I wanted to know? Is that the main thing? Why do you want to get your magnetic field very strong? Is it because
you want to get it strong?
Is it because the DHA, the O2, or to increase ATP production?
Well, here's the key. Anytime, you do have to know a little physics. Anytime you have an electron flow going across a membrane like you do on the inner mitochondrial membrane, Maxwell has 4 equations. What does it say? As electrons flow through, you develop a magnetic field at 90 degrees to that electron flow. The 5th cytochrome is called the ATPase. The ATPase has a rotating head. Why do you need that 90 degree? Because that's what spins that rotating head to make ATP. What does ATP do? If you listen to biologists, they tell you it's the high energy phosphate. Gilbert Ling has told us that it's impossible because it breaks the second law of thermodynamics by 5-fold. So Dr. Kruse does not believe what everybody else believes. He believes Gilbert Ling. So what does ATP fundamentally do? It unfolds proteins so water can bind to them, okay? Now, during the daytime, magnetic field strength is relatively low, okay? That's because light's present. It's higher in the day, but the endogenous or native magnetic field on the Earth is very low. We're talking between 20 and 100 microteslas. So what did Becker tell us in his research? The higher the magnetic flux you feel, the more sleepy you get. In other words, it helps regenerate. So do you want a high magnetic field during daytime? The answer is no. You want it at nighttime. That's the reason why you sleep on a magnetic field.
I see.
Got it? Mm-hmm. And you have to realize, just normal diurnal variations in physics, when the sun is shining, magnetic field on the Earth from the Schumann resonance is lower. At nighttime, it increases. So these are all physical forces that your biology pays attention to. How are these things codified in your brain? Because I want to make sure you understand this. The alpha wave of EEG, okay? So if you were to get an EEG and you wanted to see if you had a circadian mismatch, what would you look for? You would look for a loss of alpha wave voltage. And guess what? When I do this, since I am a neurosurgeon, and I do it relatively frequently, what do we see? Certain people in certain diseases, let's talk about it. Obstructive sleep apnea, type 2 diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease all have diminished or absent alpha waves. What else do they have? Which gets directly to your point. They also have
hypoxia.
You got it. And why is that a big deal? Because what do we know from Einstein's photoelectric effect? In order to make free radicals in your mitochondria, which are what make new mitochondria, you have to have a stream of electrons hitting some transition metals. Guess what sits in the mouth of every cytochrome? Iron, manganese, and copper. And those electrons energize the D shell electrons to do what? To make free radicals. What's the number one free radical made in mitochondria? It's called superoxide.
Yeah.
You got it. And why is a superoxide a free radical? What does a free radical mean? It has an unpaired electron.
Unpaired electron, right.
What is another one? Hydrogen peroxide. It has an unpaired electron. What's another one? The hydroxyl free radical. It also has an unpaired electron. Humans have enzymes to control the first two. It doesn't have anything to control the last one. So the more stress you make, the more hydroxyl free radicals you make. What is the effect of the hydroxyl free radical in excess in our body? It destroys cell membranes, destroys DHA. Oh, we're back to that story again. Now, what happens with low superoxide? You make superoxide from oxygen. Why is oxygen important? Well, it happens that there's this thing on the inner mitochondrial membrane, iron and manganese, iron and copper hold oxygen together to make the superoxide. It strips an electron off. The binding of oxygen to that membrane is electrostatic. What does that mean? It means it's directly controlled by electric and magnetic fields generated within that mitochondria. So if you have an altered electric or an altered magnetic field, can you hold oxygen in order to take that one electron off to make superoxide? The answer is no. So this is the reason why everybody who has type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, if you measure their superoxide level, you'll find it's absent. And that means if you cannot make free radicals, what does that mean that you cannot do in biology? It means you cannot make, you got it, exactly right. And that means that you have to work on old mitochondria that's defective. Okay?
This is a very interesting point. I've actually studied I studied this point, and specifically I realized conditions like brain fog is actually a result of too much superoxide in my view, and
or too little. See,
So it was in my view, and now you're saying, well, it could be too little, which
Correct.
I didn't think of before. Well, I understand it though, because you're saying if it's too little, it's not going to cause the gene transcription for new mitochondria. That certainly makes sense. And also, there's they have done research of various kinds of free radicals. They do stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis.
Let me give you
including
the
nitric
number one
oxide.
paper. Let me give you the number one paper you need to read, because it was just published in 2013 by David Sinclair. It's in Cell Metabolism. You can look it up.
I read it.
The paper's amazing, okay? The problem is it doesn't go deep enough, but everything that I just told you in the last 5 minutes is completely supported by his paper. Realize that I came up with these ideas 10 years ago, before there was any research out there. Why? Because I gave up my biologic perspective and put my thermodynamic engineering physics mind to work. And when you understand the physics of things, I personally believe that figuring out biology becomes way easier. But do I have to continue to look in the biological literature for guys like you who are skeptics? You're going to find out that 10 years ago, I was really a crazy mofo. But you know what happens? Every year, I get more and more right. And this is what I tell people. When you get on my site and you read my quilt document, realize that I wrote that 10 years ago. My whole goal, I knew what I had found was very counterintuitive. So every time I add a new blog, it gives you a new piece to the puzzle. And what does that do? It acts just like a fractal. It acts like a hologram. You're getting a new piece so that you begin to see a new picture. It's kind of like looking at Van Gogh's painting. If you saw it with just white paint and you didn't see it with any other colors, you'd say, I don't see Starry Night. And then he starts adding all the other layers. And all of a sudden, when he's done, holy shit, look at that. That picture rocks. Well, I'm trying to do the same thing for you because I realized 10 years ago that nobody would see what I was seeing because they didn't look at biology the way I was looking at it.
100%.
And that's the key. And the key is I continue to do that. And the people who've been following me for 4 and 5 years, it's amazing to me. The number one thing they say is, Jack, I go back and read the old blogs and all of a sudden it makes sense. And what do I tell them? Because now you're seeing it with new eyes. You're seeing a different perspective of something that you didn't perceive. And it just happened to you when I said to you about superoxide. Everybody assumes because the antioxidant theory of biology is, oh, that all free radicals are bad, when it really turns out that free radicals are good.
Right. In bursts.
Right. Correct.
So, yeah.
Right. The dose makes the toxin in everything, including free radicals.
Right. So, yeah, no, what I found was so that was my theory, the superoxide theory of brain fog and various issues. And then what I did was I looked at the genetics. So I was looking at genes, and I was looking at genes that break down superoxide. And it turns out that the people I deal with who have, brain fog, most of them have a gene, and it's only 20% of the population, that doesn't produce enough manganese superoxide dismutase to break down the superoxide. And that would cause elevated levels of superoxide. But you're also saying that it's the lack of superoxide that can also be a problem. Now, I'm wondering if this has to do with a difference that we also see in people. You mentioned that obese people have an energy problem.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, thin people also have an energy problem.
Well, you have to qualify that because people listening to this will get confused. You're talking about people that are excessively thin.
Well,
I'm not talking about regular fit people. See, there's a big distinction here. People who have below the normal weight and people who are above weight, they're both leptin resistant. Normal people aren't leptin.
Well, let's say take me for an example. Most of the people that I deal with have they're not too thin, but I'm not thin. I would say I'm pretty average as far as.
I would disagree with that. I wouldn't let you off the hook that easy because if I did an MRI on you and looked on your insides and got a shadow proton cast on you, I think you would find what I told you would surprise you. And the reason why I'm telling you that, very simply, is because you live in a city and I can tell you, since we've talked, you've made a lot of assumptions, a lot of bad assumptions.
All right.
Okay? And what I'm telling you is that your environment, you have to realize, I grew up in a place just like you did, okay? It's eventually what caused my physiology to slowly break down. When 10 years ago, I started to realize that, hey, look, I wasn't eating as much to get as big as I was. Something was radically changed in the way I handle things. Of course, I started on the conventional side of things, but I quickly realized that, hey, wait a minute. Really, really thin people and really, really fat people have something in common. Mm-hmm. And what they had in common is they all had inflammation. That means they lost their negative charge. They didn't have a DC electric current. That's where the key factor is. And see, the problem is when you come at this with the perspective that you were just asking me this question, you lose that discerning ability. And I'm not going to let you lose that discerning ability. I'm going to keep you on point and realize that what we're really talking about is positive and negative charge. And just remember, what controls the positive and negative charge everywhere in the universe? The electromagnetic force is the only force that controls negative and positively charged particles. So I want to keep you on point.
Okay, so what's the difference if the obese people are losing electrons and thin people are
also losing electrons?
Why is one person fat and one person thin?
Because their redox potential is different. And that's the key.
See, in what way is the redox potential different?
Well, the redox potential in your cell actually tells you how much charge you can hold within the cell. See, Well, how do you look at a cell and how do I look at a cell? A cell is a battery, okay? And the way that battery is built is very, very interesting. But what you have to realize is that the fatter person is losing more light to their environment than the person that's got anorexia. And here's the interesting part. The part of the body that they're losing it in is also different. See, the fatter person is losing it from here down. The person that has anorexia is losing it right here in the brain. And see, the part of the tissues, remember what we talked about earlier when we talked about the circadian clock mechanism? That whole timing thing, where you're losing the difference is a big deal. Let me explain it to you.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I want to explain it to you another way because I think you'll find this even more interesting. Because it ties to the fat thing. It ties to the fat thing. I just did a talk in a medical school in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, and I saw the girls when I first started talking had the laptops, on their laps, and I told them, just so you guys know, you're basically all creating an IUD device. And they all looked at me like I was out of my mind. I said, well, that's the reason why most of the young people these days can't have kids, because what you're doing when you put the laptop in your lap, you're speeding up the clock genes in your fertility organs faster than your SCN. So the point I'd make to you is that people who have, eating disorders or excessively thin for whatever reason are likely having the problem up in their head and not down below, whereas a guy like, say, Jimmy Moore has got the problem right at his liver. And he keeps thinking it's carbohydrates, but it's not.
No, that's very interesting, because what I realize is that the thin people have cognitive problems, whereas the obese people, their brain works relatively well.
See, you're getting smarter already.
They're obese. Yeah, that's why I'm interviewing you. I'm trying to get smarter here.
Well, I mean, and that's the point. See, the key thing is you need to realize that you are thinking about the human being as a whole, which I like, but you also have to break it down into organ systems and realize that when your biology is uncoupled, okay, that means that organ systems no longer talk to each other, okay? So you have to start to look at diseases and begin to biohack. And you got to remember, I got a 10-year head start on you. I've been doing this for a really, really long time and looking at different diseases and trying to make sense of it. And the key factor, what connects tissues so that they are able to talk to each other properly? Actually, it's these free radicals. It's the unpaired electrons. So if you can't make them, guess what? That electron that gets stripped off that goes to oxygen somewhere else, that oxygen molecule is going to your brain. Well, where did the rest of the superoxide go? Well, it's in the mitochondria. It's in your liver. And guess what physics says? Action at a spooky distance. That electron up in the brain still connects to the one that's now in the liver mitochondria constantly. So one electron spins up, the other one spins down. The more entangled particles you have in your body, the more coherent you are, the better signaling is. And see, that's the point. The poor person who's morbidly obese or fat is not coherent, but their brain's still working okay, but their body is not. Why? Because the difference between their brain clock and their organ clocks, like in their pancreas, their liver, are unyoked. And see, that's why I wrote that Ubiquination 6 blog post, for people to understand when biology is uncoupled, then your understanding that's present in Leninger's book of biochemistry is wrong. And that makes me seem a little bit unusual. But guess what? When I point you to the ubiquination literature, you start to see that, hey, maybe Jack is right. Because guess what? Most doctors don't even know what ubiquination is. And they don't realize it's the first coupled system in all of biology. It couples directly to cell cycle. Then that couples to growth, to metabolism, which is third. Food is in the third position. And this is very counterintuitive to people. But that's what the current series that I'm in right now is explaining to people. And here's what I need you to understand. What is the single most important physical force in the ubiquination system? Light. And why is that? Because it controls circadian biology. What have I been consistent about? Like when you read the leptin prescription, those 6 steps, the one thing you're never going to see in there is the word light. You know why? I wasn't trying to tell you how it was working. I was just trying to tell you this is what you need to do, okay? And if you do this, you can fix the clock timing mechanism fairly simply because you don't realize that Rolex in your head is broken, okay?
Okay, so all this is very fascinating to me. And you mentioned that every disease has to do with losing light. What is
Correct.
that? When you say light, does that mean photons?
Yes.
And what does that have to? You also speak about. So this is I'm a little unclear about this. There's protons
We'll
in
be
the.
clear about it shortly on the blog because that's the next realm we're going into.
All right. So there's
Just be very shocked to hear that just so you know that data was published from 1923 all the way up to right now. And guess where it is? You know why you don't know about it? Because it was written in Russian. And here's the thing: you're 28 years old. You didn't learn very much about World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, because you never lived in that time. You want to know why no United States scientist really knows about it? Because of those wars and the politics that was involved. But you're going to be very shocked to hear a guy named Fritz Popp in the 1970s, who was a physicist,
Yeah.
he went back and looked at all that original work done by the Russians. And you're getting ready to hear about that in the series coming. In fact, the next couple blogs opens that up. Are there books, and I mean books, published that I went back and read and translated? Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
And did I find all of this out? Absolutely. Every living thing on this planet, including plants, onions, humans, monkeys, you name it, releases a certain amount of biophotons. And here's the interesting thing, just to pique your interest. Guess what tends to leak more light than anything else? Bacteria. And what do you have in your gut? Bacteria. So you hear all this bullshit on the internet about how the microbiome really works with quorum sensing. Everybody's looking for chemicals and this and that. And guess what? It's all about light. Okay?
All right. So, yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to ask you was that, so you're losing light, right? And you say that's because you don't have enough electrons and a magnetic field to keep it in, and DHA, right?
Well, that's a pretty good assessment. You're trying to retain the light in your system because what does quantum mechanics require us to do? Retain energy in order to make use of it. So let's for the people listening, not for you now,
Okay.
people listening, I want them to think about how the sun works. The sun does exactly the same thing. When it makes a photon from two protons that come close together, it retains that photon for 100,000 to a million years. Why? For one reason: strong electric and magnetic fields in the sun. So the same thing happens in us in our mitochondria. And then when the light is released, because most people don't believe that light is released in the mitochondria, but guess what? If I put you in the cold, what do? You shiver. What is shivering from? Because you release infrared light from what? Your mitochondria.
Oh, yeah. So, and that I'm a little unclear of that. You say that. So you speak about light, and I see light as photons, but then you say we're losing light, and that's from uncoupling. The protons are going across the gradient, and that releases infrared.
You're talking about infrared light now, the heat that's released.
Okay. So that's what I didn't understand.
There's two different
lights.
Because remember, what is the key with light? Is the frequency. Okay? That's why I sent you that link yesterday to read.
Oh,
why?
I didn't have a chance to read it, but
guess what? The frequency of infrared light is different than the frequency of UV light. It's different than the frequency of microwaves.
What light are we losing?
You're losing low ELF light. That's what Fritz Popp and all his data has shown. That's what the Russians have shown. In fact, the Russians even went further. They actually showed that the number one thing that stimulates mitogenesis or mitosis in cells is extreme low frequency photons in the UV range. And you know how they proved it? They used onions to do it. And how did they block the effect? They put a piece of glass in between it, because what do you know about UV photons? They get blocked just by glass. Then they were smart and they took a piece of quartz and put it between it, and they were still able to use one onion to stimulate mitogenesis in the opposite onion. And guess what? That was done in 1923. Mm-hmm. And do you think that they kept doing research on this with different animals? You're damn right they did. And what did they find? When we got the technical abilities in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s to measure these extreme low frequencies, because we can't see them. You have to have detectors. They built these photomultipliers and were able to begin to see all this light release. What was the general trend that came out of the Russian data that I read at that time is that the sicker you are, the more light you released. The more well you were, the more light you retained. That's the take-home message. Here's the key point. I want you to go back and read the EMF2 blog post that I wrote. What did it say? That fat people lose more light to their environment. Same thing with people with anorexia. They lose more light to their environment, but they're losing it here.
It's the light that's on the UV spectrum. Is that what light they're losing?
Well, they're losing all forms of light, all different frequencies, right? And the key thing right now, where we are today, the leading researcher in the world on biophoton studies is in the Netherlands. He is now doing spectral analysis, just like a physicist would do on the sun. For those of you who are probably lost at this point, because we're going deep into physics, how does a physicist tell what atoms are in a star? It looks at the sun, right, and looks for the spectral analysis and can tell what atoms are physically in the sun because of the spectral pattern that they release. Well, it turns out we can do the same thing in our cells. And that is what we're looking at right now. So we're going to have your answer probably in the next 5 or 6 years, because do I believe that all diseases are coded for by spectral release from cells? I do. I absolutely do.
So that would suggest that we should be getting more sun? Is that... because that's going to give us more light, no?
Yeah, well...
Of the UV,
let me ask you a
infrared,
question.
We want that, no?
Let's give you a... No, no. That's the simpleton approach.
Sorry. That's why I'm talking to you, because...
I'm glad you brought it up, because it's important for you to understand. Why did dermatologists tell everybody who's a modern human the sun's bad? Because you know why? Because all modern humans can't capture the sun. Ah, you didn't think about that part, did you? See, here's the crazy thing about plants. Plants have only 3 mechanisms in which to capture the proper frequencies of sunlight. You know what you don't realize? Leaves are exactly the same as your skin. They do exactly the same thing phototrophically, okay? So guess what? You as a modern human don't have sulfur in cholesterol. You don't have sulfur in vitamin D3. You don't have sulfur in DHA. You know what sulfur is important for when it's in those lipids? One thing, it reflects the wrong frequencies that hurt you. What does it allow you to collect? Infrared and UV. Why is that? UVB makes vitamin D3, which becomes sulfated. Why do you need IR light from the sun? Because a charge separates water best to become a what? A battery.
Right.
Whose work was that? That's all Gerald Pollack's work. He proved that on a shadow of a doubt. Well, guess what? Here's what you need to know before you ask me another question. Infrared light begins charge separation of water between negative and positive. What extends the EZ? UV light. That's the reason why you need IR and UV light from the sun. And guess when that frequency is best? 8 to 11 a.m. Now stop for a minute. Go read my CT7 blog post and look at the circadian biology of hormone release, and you know what you'll find? That it's designed to be perfectly yoked to those 2 frequencies. And guess what, my friend? You live in a city. The only time you see 8 to 11 sun is on the weekends. You don't see it every day. So that means you're chronically disconnected from your battery charger almost all your life. And you don't even realize it, because guess what? You got to go to work at those times. Or your wife's got you watching kids, or whatever it is. Plus, you're not connected to the Earth's magnetic field at night like most mammals are. You sleep in a bed on the 17th floor of New York City. Well, guess what? That's another problem. And here's the point that I'm trying to make to you, okay? The sun's not bad. Only a fool would believe that. But what we have to do in medicine is explain to the dermatologist why it's a problem. It's because we're not able to do what plants can do anymore. Why? Because of our beliefs. We cover our solar panel that allows us to get those proper frequencies. And when you can't charge your mammalian battery, what's the mammalian battery made out of? DHA and water, okay? The sun is the jumper cables in this situation. What is the single number one way, like if you had a dead battery in your car, that you would go to Firestone to check? You'd put it on the battery charger and see, is it totally dead? I need a new battery, or can I just charge it and get a new one? That battery charger on us is called the vitamin D level. Mm-hmm. And when your vitamin D level is low, it tells you that you are disconnected from the sun, or you have a problem with DHA or water, or it could be all three. And see, that's where the biohack comes in. Your job as the biohacker is to figure out what's wrong. And then you slowly fix each part of the equation and you realize what it is. People on my site have already fixed the water and the DHA part. The key issue is then fixing their life so that they can get that battery charger at least a little bit between 8 and 11. In the summertime in the northern hemisphere, which is I'm assuming where you are, we can also get it from 4 to 7 if you're in the right place. But if you live in a city and you've got tall buildings all around you, it's pretty damn hard to get sunlight at that time unless you go to a park,
Right.
So you need to change those things about you, because guess what happens? Then you can charge your battery. Then you can do things. That's why I said to you earlier that when you understand the physics that ties us together, you're able then to do things behaviorally that you normally wouldn't do that actually fix you. You need DHA and water for the battery, and then you need AM or evening
water.
sun in the summertime. You got to have water. If your B1 creatinine ratio is bad on your Chem 7, and you can look at that in my Redox prescription. I go through 30 different lab tests that give you an idea how good or bad your battery really is. Your vitamin D level also will do it. But one of the things that primary care doctors have, at least in my hospital, have said to me that they've been shocked at, and this is a good teaching point for you to realize. They'll say, hey, Jack, this lady came in with a 25 dihydroxy vitamin D level. That's a D25OH level, which is how we check it.
Yeah.
And I put the person on 50,000 of D3, either a once a week or 20,000 a day, and they've been on it for 6 months and it doesn't come up. What does that tell you? It tells you their battery's dead. And see, that's what the doctors don't realize. They're like, how can I keep pouring it in? So I give them the analogy. It's very simple. It's like a flower that is in a pot, and you pour all the good stuff in, but it's got 19 holes on the bottom, and everything leaks out. So you know what that means? It means their environment is toxic. It means that something's destroying DHA or something's allowing the water to go right through them. And instead of looking at biology, you need to look at your environment. And that's what nobody's doing.
Okay, what do you think of the fact that, there's people who recommend, and I'm not sure what you recommend with vitamin D, but my issue with having vitamin D over 50 nanograms per milliliter is that it competes with the active vitamin D, the 125 hydroxy. Now,
well, just so you know, I'm pretty clear on this. I don't recommend supplements. I have a rule.
Okay.
It's in, I think it's in the CPC 9 blog post. It says, if you're designed to make it endogenously, you're not designed to take it exogenously. How's that? So how do I make my vitamin D? From the freaking sun. Okay. So here's the problem I'm going to tell you. See, I'm bringing you back and on point. I don't care what anybody else thinks.
Right.
Okay? I really don't. I understand how that battery works. And if you want to understand how that battery works, Ubiquination 8 blog post tells you how it works. It's DHA and water. You got to have those two together for the sun to begin to work. Then where you live on this planet will determine your level of vitamin D. So for example, if you live in Sweden, you're not going to have a high level of vitamin D ever, because the sun's power, it never gets you there. When you're at the equator, it's going to be way higher.
So what should they do in Sweden?
Well, what they need to do in Sweden, just think about it. If you're not designed to have a lot of sun, what do you need more of? DHA. What do you know that Swedish people have a lot of?
Fish.
Hey, how about the Inuits? What do they eat? See how it works? Vitamin D is yoked to that damn battery, and people don't understand it. So the less light you have, the more DHA you need. And when you come to the equator, you can live more like a plant, like photosynthesis. That's the reason why carbohydrates doesn't hurt people close to the equator. But when you move further from the equator, you have a huge problem. See, this is fundamentally why the low-carb, high-fat people and guys like Jimmy Moore aggravate me, because they really don't understand the physics behind how this works. And the thing is that our conditions of existence on this planet, where we live, determine what we really should do. So what you do, Mr. Cohen, and what I do is radically different, because you know what? Our personal thunderstorms are different. And what I'm trying to get you to understand, and your listeners to understand, is that I want you to hack your environment, because the number one issue is the environment. It's not your biology. And you need to realize that the fundamental things, what organizes the matter in us? Let's make it really simple. Number one, gravity equals light. The electromagnetic force equals magnetism. Archimedes principle equals water. Those are the synonyms for those things. What's the spark of life? What allows those three things to get its spark? What's the jumper cable? DHA and water. What is the ultimate battery charger that's free? The sun. Okay? The further you are from the equator, the more DHA you need. The closer you are to the equator, the more water becomes critical, just like it is in a plant. And when you realize that those 5 pathways are how biology fundamentally organizes in a cell, then you can begin your biohacking there. Then you'll really find out how bad your environment really is. See, you made a lot of assumptions earlier on yourself. And I was like, well, I'll tell you what, the number one way that I like checking redoxes, because I'm a neurosurgeon, is I see MRIs on every one of my patients. I have another blog post called the Redox Prescription 2 that tells you how to biohack your own MRI. Okay? That's how I do it. And believe it or not, I taught this to myself because I had to go back and understand the physics of the images I was looking at. And I will tell you, the reason I wrote that blog post actually is because I was at Dave Asprey's event and a radiologist came up and challenged me, and I got really, really angry because it was clear that this guy didn't know shit about the physics of the images that he was supposed to be an expert in. And there was a medical student standing there, and I told her, I said, I promise you, when I go home, I'm going to write a blog post that explains to you, and the only thing that you need to promise me is that you go share with every single medical student out there, because I don't want anybody to believe what this idiot believes, because that's the problem. And the problem is people need to understand what is on those images. It's all information about electrons and protons. I don't look at MRIs the way other people look at them. I look at them thermodynamically through what I just told you, what organizes matter. Gravity is done by light. Electromagnetic force by magnetism. Archimedes principle tied to water. The spark of life, DHA, and water. You get those 5 principles right, and then you start thinking about where you live, what your life is like. I will be willing to bet you a year from now, you'll be a whole lot better, because you'll start listening to the doctor in your head instead of the one that's giving you evidence-based medicine that is a prescription for mediocrity.
You know what? I completely agree with what you're saying about the. I think, first of all, I think doctors and even PhDs, they don't have an interdisciplinary mindset. They don't have the physics and the biology. And I see these evidence-based people, they're like looking at the science. I think they're just misguided, and they're just so narrowly focused.
Well, I wouldn't say misguided. Let's be fair, because I'm kind of sick of, especially the ancestral health community, pounding my profession when they have as much wrong as doctors do. Doctors don't learn this stuff, dude. I didn't learn this. I didn't learn any physics. I had to go back and figure this stuff out. And here's the cool thing about being an old 50-year-old guy who grew up in New York City. What did I do in 3rd grade when I didn't know something? Unlike you, I went to the library. I mean, most kids today, their library is Wikipedia or Google. Listen, everything that I learned and to talk to you about today, I physically went to Vanderbilt Medical School's library in Nashville and read this stuff. I pulled books out from other libraries on all this Russian data and read it, okay, and translated it. You can't believe the heavy lifting I did. Most people won't do that. And just so you know, a neurosurgeon in private practice, to do that, I actually had to work harder. I worked harder doing that 18 months worth of work than I did in my entire residency. Why? Because I was completely sleep deprived, because everything that I found started to make sense. So doctors don't have the time to learn.
That's the problem. Exactly.
Right.
I'm not saying they're bad people. I just think that the way the system is,
but they've been painted that way. They've been painted that way by, a lot of the alternative health people. And the thing that I'm trying to get people to understand is that I want to teach guys like you who are inquisitive and have curiosity. I tell everybody who interviews me, I don't want you to believe a goddamn thing I tell you. I want you to fact check everything. But this is what you have to promise me. Once you realize that, hey, maybe I might be right, then you just got to go and tell somebody else, look, you need to start thinking about this a little bit differently, and here's what you need to read. And just get on the right part. See, I look at myself as the dude with the flashlight, a good teacher never tells you what to see. It just points you in the right direction. And then you're able to figure it out for yourself. And what I'm trying to do is get people's attention on the correct things and off of the wrong things. So, for example, in ancestral health, why do I have a huge problem with them? Because they give you lots of good advice on food, not as good as it should be. It should be all seafood because, let's face it, grass-fed meat and organ meat don't have as much DHA as marine do. But here's the problem. They all embrace technology like it's great. Well, right. That destroys DHA. So think about how psychotic that is to advocate eat this stuff and then do something to destroy it. And then they pound on doctors that we don't know what we're talking about. And I'm sitting there going, are you kidding me?
Right.
That's the irony. See, nobody sees that perspective. They're starting to see it now. But the point that I want to make to young guys like you is that I want you to understand fundamentally why we have these breakdowns. And it almost always comes back to circadian biology. It doesn't start with food. And I know that when I say that to people and don't give them the level of information, they're like, oh, this guy's crazy. There's no way, because everybody believes it's tied to food.
Right. No, I'm actually a believer that it's not. I think we focus way too much on food. I'm definitely with you on that.
There's only one food that matters, dude. It's DHA. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you that.
So you're obviously a big fan of cold, right? And now what happens is when you are exposed to cold, you're losing infrared light through the proton loss. Now,
stop for a minute. I want you, before you make that next step, because you're getting ready to make a mistake. Are you really losing it, or are you capturing it in something called water?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Guess what? Okay. Now I'm going to stop you for a minute. I want you to think about this.
Well, you're losing heat, no?
Well, no. Heat and IR light are the same.
Right. So you're losing heat.
What the heat that's released from a mitochondria? Water surrounds it in a membrane called the minos. You can MINOS. You know what happens with water? When it heats up, it shrinks. What happens with anything that shrinks? Makes your mitochondria smaller. What happens when your mitochondria gets smaller?
Better electron flow.
You got it, bro. See, you're already smarter just by thinking about this, because you have to realize here's where water chemistry is really interesting. See, water chemistry links light and magnetism. See, and the reason why that's the case, water is a natural magnetic dipole, so it aligns within the magnetic field. The key thing is it's bound right around the mitochondria. And remember, water is a very small molecule. H2O it makes up 99.9% of the molecules in a cell because it's small. All the other proteins are massive. So water touches everything. Here's the key thing that people need to realize about water. Gerald Pollack's book was not published 10 years ago when I figured this out. I had to go back and read some of the most difficult stuff ever is Gilbert Ling's work and Martin Chaplin's work on water. I mean, I'm not kidding you. To me, Gilbert Ling is one of the most brilliant guys of the 20th century who's been completely derided by science. But I got the idea from him that I needed to really understand water better based on what he was saying. And that's when I started putting two and two together. And what happens with water is when it absorbs heat, remember, it absorbs best in 270 nanometer range. Water then charge separates. It becomes a battery by itself, okay? So technically, water inside yourself doesn't need exposure to the sun. It actually can get it directly from mitochondria. In that sense, your mitochondria acts like a mini sun inside your body. Mm-hmm. So when water charge separates, it makes a DC electric current. When that happens, that energy is then transmitted to the TENS-GERD system. What is that a synonym for? That's a synonym for collagen, integrins, all the crazy things that are in a cell. That gets dissipated all over the cell. So the energy is always conserved. And remember what I said to you before when we were talking about biophotons. The cell is designed to conserve all the energy that it uses. Why? Because it constantly recycles it. And that's how it skates the second law of thermodynamics. That's what biology fundamentally doesn't understand. And for a guy like you to put you on point, there is a book that I strongly recommend you read because of what we talked about today. It's called Life on the Edge by Jim L. Khalili. In 2007, and I realized that we had to be quantized. back 10 years ago. I had no support at all in that belief in the literature. Along comes a really funny paper out of Harvard that basically says that leaves are quantum computers. Everybody in physics lambasted this cat, okay? Well, it turns out, guess what? Some physicists said, well, we need to examine this. They went and they looked at it because all physicists prior to 2007 believed that quantum effects can only happen in cold, dry environments. Leaves are warm and wet, okay? Turns out that warm, wet environments do support quantum physics. And when these physicists realized this, they were like, wait a minute. The only way we can recapitulate these studies in our lab is when it's cold and dry. Mm-hmm. But life can do it other ways. So Khalili writes this book recently. It's not even published yet in the United States. I read it as soon as it was published. When you understand how a plant works, and you understand that Becker showed us that the DC electric current works in plants and animals, you begin to understand that whole mammalian battery. You understand the water part, and you understand the sun part. You don't get the DHA part. But what's the key point of that book? Key point of that book is warm and wet does support my beliefs. Mm-hmm. Problem is, biology doesn't know that yet. Okay? And that's the reason why I'm telling you, you need to understand water better. Now your job as a 28-year-old guy is way easier. Why? Because you don't have to read Ling. You do not have to read Martin Chaplin. You can go buy Pollock's book. It's written for a third grader.
Right.
He explains exactly how water works. And when you understand how water works, you start going, this is interesting.
Yeah, I actually, I listened to a lot of his videos. It was extremely interesting. And one of the things that I realized is like, wow, we really don't know a lot about the universe. And, we have to have a very, if you don't have, let's say, your level
let's
of
stop for a
knowledge.
minute, because I want you to finish this thought. Here's the problem. Let's state the problem truly in biology. How does a biochemist, all the guys that describe the Krebs cycle, how did they figure it out? They took a cell, homogenized it, took all the water out, and just studied the proteins. And what are we saying? The water is the single most important part. So how much do you really know when you took out the single most important part?
Very good point.
Speaking of water, give me another water. Because I've been on here with you and I'm dehydrated because I can feel it in my mouth.
100%.
The reason I stopped you there, not to be an ass, is I want you to understand that everything published in Leninger's Biochemistry, which used to be gospel to me,
is without water.
It stopped being gospel. When I realized that how much do you really know? Can you imagine, just think about it like this. Here's the analogy. I don't know what kind of car you drive, but just say we went down and we took your battery out of your car. How successful would that car be in getting you around the city you were in?
Not very.
Well, and guess what? That's where we are in modern biochemistry. So that's why when I hear a guy who's supposed to be a research biochemist like Rob Wolf or Matt Lalonde talk the nonsense that they're talking, I just sit back and go, they have no clue what they don't know. And
exactly.
Here's the point that I want to say to you guys. I'm not trying to down anybody. I'm really not. What I'm trying to do is disturb conformity with curiosity. 100%. I want you to go fact check me. I want you to go to read all this stuff, because when you do, you're going to say, either he really is crazy or he is really shrewd.
No, I'm midway. I'm like, I don't think you're crazy. I just think half of what you're saying I actually know to be true, or I believe to be true, and the other half I'm saying I need to do more research and more reading.
That's a smart guy. When I hear that, that's what I want you to do.
Instead of saying like, I understand half of it, the other half that I don't understand, he's crazy. So I don't think we should, do that. I think we should just be comfortable saying we don't know. We have to do more reading and understanding. But yeah. So here's my question.
Let's get back to one of the things you did say, because I think we left it and it wasn't fair to your listeners. Let's talk about CT, cold. Okay. CT is a synonym for magnetism. Don't forget that. Okay? That's fundamentally what it is. So
how is that?
Well, it's simple. I want you to think about water and us. It's a liquid crystal. Okay?
Okay.
We are relatively easily aligned with electric and magnetic fields when you're a crystal. Okay?
Mm-hmm. So and that has to be condensed, the water?
Well, yeah, you remember cold water is more dense. Remember, it sinks.
Right.
Remember when it's frozen, it floats on the top. That way, fish can swim underneath it. Common sense, third grade stuff.
Right.
But what people don't realize is that crystals become easily aligned with electric and magnetic fields that are made in mitochondria. And the proof I can tell you is the screen you're looking at and I'm looking at right now is an LED liquid crystal display. Well, guess what? That happens in watches, iPhones, calculators, computers. It uses the exact same principles, okay? Most of the changes in water are due to the changes in water's hydrogen bonding network. Guess what happens? In cold, they become more able to increase energy storage. Not that they're using it. They can store more energy when water's colder. So what's the main reflex in mammals that ties back to this storage ability? It's called the mammalian dive reflex. And if you look at it, it's a reflex that every single mammal on this planet has, including you. And you remember that when you were a zygote and then you became a fetus, what did you have to crawl through? A vagina. And you floated in water for a really long time, for that 9 months, didn't you?
Yeah.
But what happens when your mom's water breaks? You have to pass through a very narrow passage, right? Not being able to breathe, not being in water anymore. And you were squeezed, weren't you? Okay? That's when you use that specific reflex, the mammalian dive reflex. The mammalian dive reflex works on cold because when the mammal is born, usually into water, cold water again hits it and it doesn't take a deep breath in. It still thinks that it's within, its embryonic environment. Here's the key thing that happens after you leave that cold, wet environment that you're used to, okay? Chronic cold exposure increases AMP pathway signals, and this downregulates two major pathways in biology. Those are called mTOR and IGF-1.
Yeah.
What do we know about both of those? Anytime those go up, not only cancer, but you die sooner.
Yeah.
Cold is the only direct link left to downregulate those. See, the problem is if you eat too much protein and you're a paleo guy or an NFL player or a weightlifter, you're going to die faster. You don't see all these great, huge muscle guys at 90 years old, do you? Why? Because they die. And this is the dirty little secret of the health fitness industry. They don't tell people, okay? But all you have to do if you have a brain in your head is just go look at the NFL who do all that stuff. Those guys die way quicker unless they change their body types after they retire, which few of them do because they're all brain damaged from the things that they do.
Right.
The flip side of that is IGF-1 is driven by what? Carbohydrates, okay? So if you eat too many carbohydrates, you eat too much protein, it has a bad effect on you somewhere down the path. How can you mitigate both risks? How can you eat a higher protein template or a higher carbohydrate template and mitigate it, assuming your environment's not toxic, cold?
Interesting.
And that's the key. And what do we now know in biology? The oldest living things on this planet happen to live in the Antarctic seas and the polar seas. Now you know the reason why. And what's the other part of the equation? Getting back to the baby crawling out the vagina. What do you know about things that live on the bottom of the polar seas? What's the pressure like?
Higher.
You got it. That's how it ties to this story because that's where Archimedes' principle in water plays a role. You don't need as much oxygen when you live in those type of environments. In other words, pseudohypoxia, going back to Sinclair's paper, actually becomes a benefit when you're pressurized. But see, we're mammals that are not sea-dwelling mammals. We live on land. So we lose that perception that it works in us. But guess what? It's built in to your DNA because you are a eutherian mammal. So if you use the CT protocol, guess what? You can use it to your benefit when you're sick or you're ill. I don't really tell people to use it to improve their performance, but can you? Have I talked to guys like Ben Greenfield about doing that? Absolutely. I mean, most athletes now, even professional ones, are using it. But I want people like you or people who are sick to realize the reason you're doing it is to improve the ability of water in your cells to carry more electrons, to store them, so that when you do need them, you can use them.
Very interesting. Now, I have a couple, we're speaking a lot about water, and you obviously speak a lot about water. I actually have a few questions on how to improve the water that we're drinking. So what I do actually is, you obviously don't like fluoride in the water, and for whatever reason, I have a problem getting a reverse osmosis system. So what I do is I have a distiller. Now I'm assuming you're not going to like that. Is that a good assumption?
Yeah, distilled water. I'll be honest with you. Distilled water is not something I'd go with. I would tell you if you have a problem getting water in your environment, and it just you're making me laugh because I just posted a blog post yesterday from a guy who I spoke with in LA. His name's Luke Story. He gave a talk about what he does in LA to get his water, and everybody in the audience thought he was crazy. And I told Luke that when I came back to New Orleans, that I was going to put in a blog post that everything that he does is actually there's a quantum reason for it. And I posted it, and he actually responded on Twitter, and he goes, Jack, he goes, thank you so much for proving to my friends I'm not crazy. But to get to your point, I would tell you that spring water, and there are websites even in cities where you can go get spring water because it has a higher alkaline level. Why is alkalinized water a little bit better than anything else? It goes back to Pollock's work. If you read it carefully, higher pH water charge separates best. In other words, it makes it a bigger EZ. So remember, distilled water doesn't have that effect. So that tells you that water is kind of dead water. Meaning, when I say dead water, I'm not talking about the woo shit you read on the internet. I'm talking about the ability to carry energy. So colder water that has a higher pH is better. And guess what spring water is? It's affected by the Earth's tectonic plates.
So what if I do this? How's this for biohacking my water? I increase
biohack for it. I already got a biohack for you, but tell me what you're going to say.
I increase the pH by putting in calcium carbonate. That's number one. I make it colder by putting it in the fridge. Number two. I hydrogenate it I have a hydrogen water machine, so I load it with hydrogen.
I like that one. I don't like the fridge.
All right, 1 second. And number four, I shine it with infrared light, which I've been doing for the past few days. I'm shining my water with infrared to make it to separate the charge, make it more have more electrons. Because Pollock said that the best way to do that is to shine infrared on it.
Right. So let me give you a couple.
What do you think of that water?
I like it in terms of an upgrade to what you're doing, but here's what I would tell you.
What is it missing?
I'd rather you use your drinking water instead of putting it in the fridge. Make ice cubes, out of that water and cool it. Here's the thing: I'd actually like you to put it in a copper pot and put it on your magnetico.
Interesting.
Okay. Remember, I tell people not to sleep on the magnetico during the day. But guess what? When you can use that magnetico for something else. Okay? Remember, water is a magnetic dipole. Okay? So if you make the water cold and you keep it on it, and then use it that way. I know you live in the city, so the best way, I want you to think about what the French used to do, how smart they were. They'd make wine, and where would they put it? In wine caves under the ground, closer to what? The magnetic field. And see, that's the reason why the wine was better, because what did it do? It lowered oxidation inside the bottle. You're trying to do the same thing in you with your own water. So I want you to think about wine when you're doing your biohack on the water. The things that I told you to add to your routine, get it out of an electromagnetic refrigerator. Okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense because I think what that is, it helps, but it hurts. It's a net negative. Okay.
Okay.
So I would use ice cubes. Put it in a big copper pot, put your water in there, and then use your water that way. The red light I love, but put it on the magnetico too.
Interesting. Okay, I'll do that.
There's another hack. One more. I don't know how you're going to do this, but I've thought about it. And the only reason I didn't do it is Dave Asprey sells this vibrating plate.
Yeah.
What else do you know about ultrasound? Ultrasound actually comes from Pollock's work. Ultrasound alone increases the exclusion zone in water.
I got an ultrasound device. I could put that on it. You're saying?
But you got to check the EMF that it emits. See, I looked at Dave's plate and I was thinking about doing my water in it, not getting on it.
Yeah.
And
wait, what's the problem with getting? I have a vibration plate too. Is that not?
No, it's good, but the problem is you have to be careful with the effect. Like, for example,
EMFs. You're saying?
Well, it's not only EMF, but you're also disconnecting from the earth.
So what if I do grounding while I'm on it?
Yeah, that would be cool. I don't know how you're going to do that being on that plate.
No, because I have a grounding mat here actually.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I have this, and I could put it on. Or I just have it on me.
I will tell you that that's a biohack you need to do. I personally believe it won't be as effective because most of the grounding mats that I've checked, not so hot.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Maybe that's why I don't feel an effect from it. I was always wondering, well, if grounding is so important, why is this not producing any effect from it?
Well, a lot of times it's because most of them cause their own EMF problems to begin with. And remember, I'm very, very cognizant of anything I put next to my body for that reason alone. But, the biohack that you just talked about with water, those are just some things for you to think about in terms of the upgrade. The copper pot, the ice, and using your magnetico. In other words, getting your money out of that mattress.
Well, if I put it
Because
on the mattress,
that's effectively what the French are doing when they bury their wine in the ground. Why do they do it? They're getting the magnetic effect from the tectonic plates and magma. You can use the same thing.
Should I put it directly on the magnetico or on my bed, which is on top of the magnetico?
Me personally, I would actually put it directly on the magnetico. Why? Because remember, unlike us, water is water. So you're trying to structure the water before it gets in you, so it carries more energy. I think, I really do think if you live in a city, it's a great hack because the number one effect of living in the city, it dehydrates you. You can see that on your BUN and creatinine ratio. I'd love to see a bunch of city dwellers. And, it brings up another point. You just made me think about it. I just gave a talk about 2 months ago in Asia. And I was in Tokyo and I was actually in the Philippines. And you'll be interested to hear this. Do you know that the Japanese have done huge studies, and I'm talking double-blinded control studies, on a water called Kangen water. Kangen water is alkalized, and they've seen huge effects in Japan. And I told one of the Japanese people when I was over there that if we did the same studies in the United States, we wouldn't get the same effect. And he was like, why? And I told him, I said, the mammalian battery works on water and DHA. In the United States, no one eats raw seafood like you guys do. The reason that you're seeing these huge health benefits is because you have the other part of the equation, right? Americans are breaking that rule like crazy. They're all dehydrated, but they don't realize their real problem is the DHA side of the equation. Ironically, it's why the paleo guys get a small little check mark from me, because the main benefit of their diet is only one thing. More DHA is going in, but not enough for the environment they allow. And the Japanese work on Kangen water, what's published, is something you'd probably be interested in because it really ties to what we're talking about today. These are fundamental things, and it also shows you why evidence-based medicine is broken, because I just gave you an environmental reason that what happens in Japan will not be reproduced here. And what is one of the key methods in the scientific method? It has to be reproduced.
Right.
What's the bad part? We're making the assumption that the Japanese and us are the same, aren't we?
Interesting.
And why did I tell you before, don't make assumptions, right?
And I make a lot of assumptions.
Well, I know. I can tell by the questions that you've asked me, but the reason why this is good, while you're interviewing me, I'm giving you point counterpoint of why I have the perspective that I have, so that you begin to think, I never thought about that. And that's the point. That's how you get smarter.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about DHA. Now, I have a couple questions. First of all, I just want to mention that I actually walked 10 miles yesterday to get some raw oysters, and I ate about 15 of them. So
that's good.
I'm trying your system out here a little. Well, I don't like the way they taste, but I'm eating them anyway.
Well, when I first started out, just so you know, I hated them, and now I crave them. See, I used to love cheesecake. Now I don't eat cheesecake.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's what happens. The healthier you get, the more electrons you have. Guess what it does? It changes the choices in your brain.
Okay, so
and you don't have to try.
My question is, you support fish, right? The problem is when you cook fish, you're heating DHA.
So, well, who said anything about cooking them?
Well,
okay. You just made another assumption.
I was making an assumption that when you're recommending fish, it's so you're saying not cooked fish.
Well, here's the thing: can I cook them now and eat them and get away with it? The answer is yes. But back when I was a fat ass at 360 pounds, I was eating raw seafood.
Interesting. Okay.
And see, these are the things. See, I'm glad you're bringing this stuff up, because there's a lot of miscommunication in ancestral health, low carb, high fat, and paleo, who they put words in my mouth what I said. I didn't say any of that. Okay. No one ever asked me what I do. See, the members on my site know what I tell them. Okay. And here's the point. All seafood, even bad seafood, is better than grass-fed meat. That makes me an enemy of the state. Okay. But you need to realize that raw seafood is better. And the reason I want you to understand this is the reason why Okinawans live longer than any other. What's the other thing that Okinawans eat besides raw seafood? Pork. What does pork have in it? Sulfur. What did I tell you earlier about sulfur is important in your skin? Reflecting bad frequencies of sunlight. Mm-hmm. Do I have a blog post about that? Yeah, it's called Tens Gritty 7. Read it. It's called Black Hole Sun. This is the reason why all these parts, what do you learn when you learn about quantum physics? Everything is connected. There's always a reason. It's your job as a human to make these connections.
Okay,
and that's key.
And you, here's a few more questions. You would say farm fish is better than no fish? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, and
but what is that something that I would make a staple? Absolutely not. But is it a bridge to a better land? Yes.
I see. Okay, fine. And you're against DHA in supplement form, but what
I'm not against it. I would just tell you that if you're sick, you need to eat real seafood. But say if you're traveling or if there's you need a bridge, I'm okay with DHA there. But here's the key with it: you have to keep it in a cold, unlit environment. It's got to be dark. Why? Yeah. Because DHA taken out of its biologic package is a polyunsaturated fat, is extremely sensitive to photooxidation and temperature oxidation. So if you're one of these idiots that buys, fish oil from Walmart, realize that it's been sitting in Arkansas, which is like 95 degrees. That fish oil is like eating a trans fat hamburger from McDonald's.
Right. So I buy actually the Life Extension brand because they make sure that it's not oxidized.
They ship it from Florida to wherever you are. You know how hot it... Look, today it's 90 degrees in the morning.
But I get it in the winter.
All right, that's good. If you're smart and buy it there. But I want you to go back to what we said earlier. When do the French ship wine? Only when it's cold. Right. You need to have the same idea about DHA. But see, people aren't doing that.
Okay, but assuming people are doing that.
In the wintertime, that's smart. Keep it in your freezer. You're doing good.
So they have, the capsules are dark and they test it. And I want a company I trust, so that's why I'm doing that.
I have no problem with that. As long as your listeners get that level of sophistication.
Yeah, and I'm also shipping it when it's cold, and I think it's coming from Colorado, so I mainly buy it in the winter. That's what I do with the DHA. So you're saying that's how would that compare to let's say farm fish? You're not getting the heavy metals and the toxins in there.
Yeah, the heavy metals. That's a bunch.
I know, yeah.
That's a bunch of Chris Kresser bullshit. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't look. The evolutionary solution is built into seafood. It's called selenium. Look, if anybody should have heavy metal toxicity, it should be me. I eat more seafood than anyone else. Here's the real problem. Heavy metals are only a problem for people who have a really low redox. When you first start out, you may have some reactions when you start eating it. I did. Literally within 6 weeks, they were gone. Why? Because what happened? You started to build up your electric charge. I even started, checking EKGs and checking EEGs on myself and noticed big changes. When those alpha waves comes back and your voltage changes, dude, you start to become healthy. Interesting. And then all the things that you worry about. Remember I said to you earlier, stop focusing on shit that doesn't matter and focus in on stuff that does matter.
I agree. That's
my point. And my point is raw seafood is going to help you. The wilder it is, the better. I'm not a fan of farm fish, but if you're telling me you're using it like you're using the supplement as a bridge to get you through, I'm fine with it. But I'm telling you clearly the staple has to be, what's in Brain Gut 6 or in my book, the Epi-Paleo prescription. Eat the stuff you're designed to eat by evolution because your brain can't make it.
Interesting. All right. So now you speak a lot about how to increase the electron flow. You suggest eating more fat, right?
Well, fats fundamentally help because let's think about it. When fat's broken down in your body, it basically turns into water and carbon dioxide.
Which so does carbs.
Well, hold on a minute. Here's the difference, though. they're both expelled by sweating and breathing, which acts to cool us on the surface. And this increases the magnetic sense in your mitochondria. Carbohydrates don't do that. Carbohydrates raise the positive charge in your body through a hormone in your brain called neuropeptide Y. And how do we know that? If you eat carbohydrates excessively in a mismatched environment, you'll lower your voltage. Now, where can you eat carbohydrates?
When you're around the equator, you get sun.
Yeah. Why? Because you got the sun to offset it. But if you live in Sweden and you think you can get away, eating a fruitarian diet or a repeat diet, not going to happen. You need to understand that everything is coupled and yoked. The problem is our beliefs have uncoupled and unyoked things.
My problem with a high-fat diet, so I actually think that if you're, I see people eating a high-fat diet, and I think that's good as long as you're getting into ketosis. But there's some people who eat a high-fat diet and are not getting into ketosis.
Ketosis is one of those things that Jimmy Moore has just pulled out of his ass.
You're saying it doesn't depend on it shouldn't depend.
You don't need to be in ketosis. I have a good friend who lives in Boston. Him and I are doing a lot of work on light. I don't believe. I think it's a complete waste of money for you to buy keto sticks and check your urine. Here's the key. You are going to get well as long as you increase your DC electric current. I'm going to keep bringing you back to this.
DC, and you're saying that fat does that. My question is...
Oh, no, I'm not saying. I'm saying DHA does that.
Oh, I see. But you also recommend...
Fat, but the fat has to act to turn light into the DC electric current. Remember, this is what people don't understand. DHA is not used as a fuel source for humans. We reserve it and put it in our central nervous system. So that polyunsaturated fat is not equivalent to another polyunsaturated fat.
What about like saturated fat? You say, so you mentioned, huh?
It's fine. I mean, what it does, it increases your electron current flow, which increases your magnetic sense.
How does it increase your electron current flow?
Because it's very simple. Think about when you break down 1 mole of glucose, you make 36 ATP.
So it's a calories thing.
No, it's not a calories thing. It's an electron thing. There's more electrons going through electron chain transport. How do we know that? 1 mole of a saturated fat makes between 150 and 140 and 150 ATP. So third grade math say, okay, if you're making more ATP, what does that mean? You can unfold more proteins to bind more water, provided you can do it.
But the more calories you eat in general, the more ATP you're going to produce, the more electrons you're going to have to go through.
No, because you get to a point where you have to uncouple. Remember, what happens when you have too much energy in your body? Your body naturally will uncouple. Why does Jimmy Moore keep eating ketotic and he keeps getting fatter? Because guess what? He can't uncouple. He can't. Right. So guess what? You look at his pictures from 2005 to now, and I know Jimmy, he eats precisely what he tells people. He is ketotic to the max. What he doesn't realize is that he's breaking the other side of the barrier. He has no DHA in his body. He's not making any superoxide. He can't entangle any electrons. He can't make new mitochondria. So you know what he's working on? He's working on 2005 mitochondria. So let me ask you a question. If you bought a Ferrari and never did any maintenance on it in 2005, would it work like a Ferrari in 2015, or would it work like a Nissan Sentra blowing black smoke?
Right.
That's his problem. And that's why I got to get you off of this fats. Stop with the macronutrients.
Right.
Think about it from electrons. Here's
I've tried various.
Stop for a minute.
Okay.
The only thing ketosis does is allow you to increase the magnetic sense in your mitochondria to improve things. So what is it? It's like chemotherapy. It's like X-ray therapy for cancer. It's a bridge until you fix your environment. What I'm saying, it's not a strategy to use your whole life. It is a bridge to a bigger environmental change that you have to create. The problem is Jimmy's not creating that environmental change. In fact, he's making his environment worse. And what do we see? The results. It's very simple. There's a famous guy that you know very well, Mr. Cohen. His name's Einstein. He said, if you keep doing the same shit over and over and you expect a different result, that's called insanity. Yeah. Jimmy has millions of people following him. He's telling them that ketosis is the be-all, end-all, and it's not. And why do I have a problem with that? Remember, everybody gets on my profession for the same reason. We tell people the same thing. Well, guess what? They're doing the same thing and not realizing how their advice is missing big pieces. So I have to be the guy to be the bad guy to point out what really is going on. What's the flip side? The paleo guys, they're all look like Adonis on the outside. My prediction is none of them are going to make it to 90 years old.
Right.
Right? And here's the point that I'm trying to make to people. I pointed out, I don't care what they do, but the people that are with me, most of these people are sick. They're more on Jimmy's side than they are on the paleo side. But the point is, I have a duty to do no harm. When I know that I know something, I'm going to share it. You can do whatever you want with that information. But when you tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, I got a problem with that. I got a really big problem with that, especially when you don't know what you're talking about.
100%.
And I'm going to point that out because guess what? I took an oath to do that. Jimmy didn't, Rob Wolf didn't, Chris Kresser didn't. But I did. And I have a duty to share with what I know. You have a duty as a human being to take what I just told you and decide what you want to do with that.
I see some people doing very well on a diet high in saturated fat, and I see some people not doing well. My question is, and I'm one of those people who do not do well on a high saturated fat diet.
Guess what it tells you?
What?
Their environment. You already know the answer, so why would you ask me this question?
Right, so it's the environment. And I also realize that and this is based on the research, the less calories I eat, the better, and that's because it increases the oxidative phosphorylation efficiency of that.
It also increases autophagy at night.
Autophagy as well.
Right?
Yeah.
Autophagy is the key. That's the reason why we have to sleep. So what you just pointed out is the point that I've been trying to make for the last hour and 40 minutes, is that people don't realize that biology is paying attention to your environment. And the macronutrients that you can use or can't use is based on the environment. So, but I hate to keep pounding on the guy, but I'm going to. Jimmy has to eat ketotically because of the environment he allows. Remember, he makes all his money from podcasting, Twittering. I mean, he's at an obesity conference right now. If you follow his Twitter feed, the guy's constantly on it, but he has no clue how blue light affects mitochondrial function or melatonin in his brain. You need to hear this. The flip side is, can you live in a city, in my opinion, and still be relatively healthy? The answer is yes, as long as you're doing some of the things that Mr. Cohen has shared with me he is doing.
Right.
So, see, I'm going to tell you, it is possible. See, I'm not a fatalist in any of this. I mean, my day job puts me at the same risk as Jimmy has. I lost my 150 pounds and it's never come back. Okay? And not only that, did I do a biohack in 2014 to prove that I was correct, that food doesn't matter. Yeah, I ate Rob Wolf, Chris Kresser's diet for 9 months and gained 42 pounds. Didn't sleep on my magnetico, didn't do any CT. I ate exactly what they eat and gained 42 pounds. Then flipped the switch and lost all the weight doing it my way. Okay, eating an epi-paleo diet, getting back on the magnetico. So what does that tell you? Is food really the driver or not? And did I tell people at Asprey's event exactly what I did? Did they see me? Yeah. See, I did. I'm trying to make the point. You look at Jimmy, you look at me. How did I go up and down and knew, why would I put myself at that risk? Because the rules of physics tell us one thing. They're bidirectional. Okay? Right. They're time invariant. This is the beautiful message that I'm giving to people. No matter how broken you are, you can fix yourself if you understand the context and the metrics that matter, not the ones that don't. And why am I being so aggressive with you now? It doesn't matter. Food does not matter. The key is DHA. DHA does matter. DHA generates that DC electric current. All you need to focus in on is that DC electric current. Make sure that this clock right here runs faster than all the other clocks in your body, and guess what magically happened? I'll stop being a dumbass, and I'll start looking pretty shrewd, and you'll start getting a lot better.
Interesting. So in my research, what I found was that people who have mitochondrial problems, specific kinds, it causes the suppression of orexin. And you're a neurosurgeon, so obviously you're probably familiar with orexin, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my theory is that when the mitochondria is not producing enough ATP, that it leads to the suppression of orexin. And that's actually a theory in the science that when you don't have enough ATP...
Let me stop you for a minute. Mr. Cohen, when is the number one time that you produce the least amount of ATP? I'm talking about you specifically. There's a reason I'm stopping you here, and I want you to think. It's in REM sleep.
That's fine.
What else does your research tell you about REM sleep? It's the single most important time for you to get well, isn't it? So, how can you have?
What about slow wave sleep?
Don't try to change.
Okay, fine.
Stay on REM sleep.
Yeah, REM sleep.
You don't make any ATP during REM sleep. Most people don't know that. But guess what? You know you do. So your theory, great. A theory is really good, but when it has no teeth to it, and there's the no teeth, that's why I took that right apart. I don't want your listeners to hear nonsense. I want to keep them focused on the prize. So when you start talking orexins, that means that you have to have a very full grasp of what's going on. The answer is no. And if you really want to know the best research that's been done on orexins, go read Louis de Licea at Stanford University. He's the guy that started all the optogenetics. He did the work on the hypocretin neurons in people who have narcolepsy. Mm-hmm. That's where orexin research, to me, fundamentally gets the story right. The problem is, I think it's been completely misread by modern biologists, and they're not going to solve any problems going that way. What I want to point people to is what we do know about modern sleep research. We all know, it's not even controversial in any community, that REM sleep, in any place you look, is 100% associated with wellness. Well, guess what? Every single disease we talked about today has deficiencies in REM sleep. Mm. And here's the key. You don't design to make ATP there. What is Gilbert Ling's brilliance? He basically said ATP isn't what we think it is. And why you brought this up, I hope it really makes you understand that what Ling said, he said it's important, but it's not important for the reason we believe. It's important to unfold proteins so water can bind, okay? Right. It's not the high energy phosphate bond. So I'm not going to let you go down this path. I mean, you could do it on your own, but you won't do it when you're interviewing me because it's not important. ATP is not important. What is important is autophagy and the DC current. And here's the interesting part. We haven't talked about this, but we will now since you brought it up. When we're awake, the DC current is operational in the brain. When we sleep, it's gone. And actually, we can measure this. What is active at nighttime? Light. Gets back to our story. Optogenetics, and it gets back to biophotons. What does the brain use in autophagy? It uses optical signals. Mm-hmm. And that's the key. And how do we know that this is true? Believe it or not, Becker's original reports, one of the things that he did when he cut the salamander's legs off, to do these studies, he measured the DC current while they're awake. And how did he, do this nice? He put the salamander on a 4,000 Gauss magnet and then amputated their leg. As soon as he put them on the magnet, they went to sleep. And the DC current went away. And what did he do? 3 seconds after removing the salamander, after he cut the leg off, they woke right up.
Here's my question. The electron flow causes the DC current, right?
Well,
if that's the case, that's increasing magnetism.
We don't believe that.
Oh, we don't believe that. Okay.
No. See, okay. That's your misconception because you don't know the science good. Becker work is really critical here. He found that the DC current was right below the myelin layer outside the nerve. Mm. So it's actually in the CSF. Uh-huh. And here's the key. What's also there? That's where DHA is. Mm. So I believe the DC current is directly tied to DHA, which is what I said to you before, that for 600 million years since the Cambrian explosion, what has never been replaced? DHA. In fact, complexity is always tied to the amount of DHA in a tissue in any part of the eukaryotic kingdom. What does DHA fundamentally do according to Michael Crawford's work? It's very simple. It turns light into DC electric current and vice versa. So if you think about
how does it do that, by the way?
It's quantum. I'll send you a piece. I'll send you data. In fact, the group that you joined, that is one of the key papers that's actually in all their stuff. It's called Quantum Theory of DHA. It's written by Michael Crawford and his group. It's a phenomenal paper. It gets into all the details. We talked about that. Dude, your head would explode because you need to really understand organic chemistry extremely well because it talks about bond angles and the planar views of the double bonds in the 22 carbons. And that's the key. The key is the atomic structure. And here's the irony. If you know anything about polyunsaturated fats, DPA, which is the cousin of DHA, only differs from atomic structure, 2 protons. 2 protons, DPA has no quantum effects.
Very interesting.
None. But yet, if you look at them, from a structural standpoint, like they look like twins. That shows you how important DHA is. And that's the reason why it's never been replaced one time. And it's always found in cell membranes of eukaryotes. Always.
So let's make a prediction here. Let's say if I decide, based on this knowledge that you're presenting here, so the takeaway is that we want a lot of DHA, we want a lot of water, we want sun. So let's, and also you've mentioned leafy greens so that the infrared light can come into our tissues.
Or pork.
Okay, fine.
There's other ways of getting it. Vegetables are a poor way to obtain solar radiations and minerals. But are they acceptable? Yes.
Okay.
Are they high on my list? No.
Okay, so pork, what other animal foods will do that?
Eggs are great.
Well, I'm allergic to eggs, though. That's and a lot of people are as well.
That's what I'm saying. But the reason why you probably have an allergy, again, brings the immune system in, is your redox that good. You just got finished telling me you're in great shape. Well, guess what I would tell you? If you didn't live in a city and you ate more seafood, your allergies would magically go away.
Interesting.
Yeah, of course it is. Science is always interesting. The thing is, most of the things that we believe are diseases, none of them are fixed. I said it to you earlier, but you just glanced right over it in your own world. What I'm telling you is what you'll find. All these things that you have, the eczema, the atopic dermatitis, the allergy to seafood, that's one of my favorites. Guess what? It all goes away when your DC electric current comes back. There has not been an animal or a plant tested that doesn't get better, that doesn't improve when the DC electric current goes up. And there's only one way to make it, dude. 600 million years is behind what I'm telling you. And you can fact check all you want. It's not been replaced one time in our kingdom. Not one time.
Okay, so let's say what the prediction is. Let's say if I'm eating like 15 oysters 2 times a week, I get sun during 8 to 11. I'm getting cold, so we got that going on. I would get sulfur.
Let's talk about the white elephant in the room that you haven't wanted brought up. Where do you live?
New York City.
Okay, and what floor are you on right now?
3rd.
Okay, so
I'm in the EMF hellhole.
Right, and I want you to think about something else. You're on the 3rd floor. What did Ubiquination 1 say? The higher you go off the ground, what happens? You're more disconnected chronically. You need to read the Ubiquination 1 blog post. Can you live in the healthiest state in the United States, Utah, and go out and kill yourself? Yep. Why? Because you're elevated off the planet. Guess who else we're finding? It just happened in the media. Remember the German wings guy? He had a bad redox to go up. Why do you think he killed everybody? He was 38,000 feet above the air. Can you have an acute psychotic break when you're disconnected? When you don't have any DHA in your brain? All of you guys watch it and think he's crazy. He was, something had to be wrong. No, I think he had an acute psychotic break when he disconnected from the planet. What else do we know? Who else goes above the earth chronically? Astronauts. Look up Valery Poikolov. See what happened to him in 437 days. Okay? Guess who does all that data? The Russians again. Why do I read this stuff? Because guess what? Being in space simulates where you are right now. You technically, my friend, are a city-dwelling zoo animal astronaut. And the assumptions that you make, I don't make. I'll let you continue down the path that you want to, but I'm going to tell you that I question your assumptions. Okay. And I've told you that at least 5 times today.
Right.
So you can keep doing all you're doing, but it doesn't mean that you are doing enough. Why? Because you're like the flower.
I see
that's
you
got 19 holes on the bottom.
So even if I eat oysters, I get sun, I get cold, I'm eating a lot of vegetables, as long as I'm living in the EMF hellhole on the 3rd floor.
As long as I'm saying you need to biohack it. You need to.
What's the best way to biohack it? I'm in this place. I'm not going to move for another 2 years. What do I do?
I tell you, read the redox prescription. You know what you do? It's got 30 different labs. Get all those labs, get MRIs, and look. I would love to see what your lumbar spine MRI is, because I could tell right away. If you got fat replacement in your marrow, if you got fat replacement in your muscles at 28 years old, dude, phew. And I would make you stop taking all your vitamin D3, and I'd do a tibial compression test on you. And if you flunked, I would just smile at you and say, enjoy New York City, bro. And you got to realize, I'm a native New Yorker like you are. I love that city. I never go to that city anymore. And when I'm there, I make sure I'm in and I'm out.
Interesting.
And it kills me because I miss the sports. I miss the New York Times. I miss, all the things about it. I mean, the reason I figured a lot of this stuff out is because the times that I spent in the Museum of Natural History, that place to me is ground zero for me. Okay.
How does someone get a map of the places that are good to live?
Well, I did a biohack in 2010, and I posted it. In fact, it says, you'd have to Google it because I can't remember what blog it is, but it says, does where you live matter? And the assumption that I went in with, my hypothesis, was that I was going to live above the 59th latitude in a cold, deep hole. And I actually told several of the members on my site, that's where I believed I was going to go. And after doing the biohack, I was wrong.
The Gulf of South.
You're right. The best place that I tested in the States is here, but the best place was in the Riviera Maya, Mexico.
Mm-hmm. So,
and,
but
you know what happens to be right there too, right? You know what the north, where New Orleans is, and you know what the south, where the Riviera Maya is. What does that border on each side?
What?
The Chicxulub crater. What is that all about? You know anything about that?
I think you mentioned that the Gulf of South.
When the dinosaurs died and mammals.
Yeah, so it's closer to the ground. It's closer to the Earth's magma.
166-mile hole in the ground.
So it's closer to the Earth's magma, and that creates a magnetic field. And
there's another effect that you're not thinking about. You haven't thought all this through. You got a big hole in the ground. You're closer to magma. You have higher magnetic field. You want to know something else you need to learn about water? And I was kind of hoping you would put this together already. Equatorial water or tropical water is warmer. Seafood is not as plentiful there. Seafood is more plentiful in cold, dense water. We talked about that.
Right, but
why is the Gulf of Mexico the one outlier?
Because of the magnetism.
Big freaking hole in the ground in the Gulf. And guess what?
The magnetism.
Now you're getting smarter. So, what shocked me? That's what shocked me. When I realized that was the place that allowed me to have seafood, lots of it, very cheaply, good sun, solid water. I didn't have to worry about all the aquifers going dry. I was like, damn, this shocked me. It really shocked me. And I shared this with all my members in 2010, 2011, told them, look, I'm not going to be in Nashville much longer. And it shocked my family. So when you want to know how my convictions are, I walk the walk and talk the talk. Okay? Here's what I'm going to tell you. You come on as a skeptic, and I hope you leave as a skeptic, but I want to make sure you understand something. You need to do a better job in your own environment. Stop assuming that you can put spackle on your quarter panel and get away with it and still live on the third floor in New York City. You may be the guy that can. I'm not saying you can't.
Right. What
I'm saying is you need to stop assuming that you can. And what I need you to do, the name of your website is Self-Hacked. Mm-hmm. You need to start hacking that a little bit better. And you need to be really slick about it. And I would tell you, read that redox prescription, the 30 labs that are there, and I want you to read the redox 2 one about the MRI. So you're probably a young guy, you probably never had an MRI. But if you ever do get the chance to get one, it's a perfect way for you to use that as a baseline, you going forward, and you can start trending all those labs. That's a biohack I'd like to see you blog on. Why? Because you are an intelligent guy. You have a nice readership. There are totally different people that I'm going to tap, but you're in a city, and you're in a place that I love, and I won't even go back to based on what I know. And that should be an eye-opener for you.
Interesting. So I have a couple of quick questions that I want to ask, and just like what you think of certain things, quick answers. How much iodine should someone take a day? Or in the form of seaweed?
I'm glad you caught yourself. I generally say it's depending on your non-native EMF exposure. So for me, days in surgery, I'll usually eat a dozen or 2 oysters. I tend to eat seaweed. Days that I'm in doing a lot of x-ray work.
How much iodine does that equate to?
Depends on the seaweed. Every seaweed is different.
So what do you aim for, though? Like what dosage?
Well, here's the problem. Where I live, I don't have really good access to seaweed. I have great access to seafood, so I eat the seafood and not the seaweed. The seaweed I get when I go out and have sushi, which in New Orleans we have availability. But when I was in Nashville, I actually had more availability to the seaweeds. And if you read my Brain Gut 6 blog post, I break all the seaweeds down and tell you which one has the most. I think Dolce has the most iodine in it. That turns out to be one of the ones that the people in Okinawa eat. And it's one of the reasons why I believe they don't get breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a hard, fast rule for that. I base it on what I'm doing that day. So, like, for example, today we have the French Quarter Fest. And I'm getting off this soon to go enjoy it.
Okay.
I'll be going out and I'll probably have seafood for lunch, and I'll probably have seafood for dinner. And the reason why is because I'm in a city where there's going to be shitloads of other people using their bidirectional microwave devices called cell phones. When I go back to work, if I'm in clinic and I'm not in surgery, I don't have to eat seafood that day. I may do a little bit of CT, depending on how much I'm in there, but I base everything that I do on my environmental exposure because my redox potential is already pretty good. See, that's the thing that I fixed. Now I'm all about managing that issue. And that's kind of what I'm trying to tell you, that you have to get in that mindset is I need to really establish what my baseline redox is, my baseline mammalian battery, and then make your decisions from there.
So if you're in a good environment, personally, do you take any supplements? None. Okay, fine. And
not now. I mean, did I in the past? Yes, but not anymore. I don't need it.
Interesting. How do you test if somebody how oxidized somebody is?
Well, again, that's all laid out in the redox. But I would tell you the number one test, the cheapest test, is your vitamin D level, your DHEA level, and I would say your BUN creatinine level. I think the BUN creatinine level is one of the cheapest, easiest ways to do it. I want people 7-to-1 or less.
Okay.
If you're above 10-to-1, if you're 10-to-1 or below, you're okay. But if you're above 15-to-1 or 20-to-1 or 25-to-1, you're in trouble. Just so you know, here's some bad news from Mr. Cohen. I haven't tested anybody in a city who's broken 15-to-1.
Interesting.
And that's an easy test to do because it's one of the cheapest tests. And to answer your other question, how I test, I do quarterly testing, quarterly blood draws. All the bloods that I do are published in my book. Mm-hmm. There's a whole chapter on testing. Those are the things that I do. And most of those things you'll be happy to hear. Unfortunately, you can't get it because of Life Extension. But Life Extension has most of these tests. But in New York City, you can't get them just because of the laws there. But most other places you can. So if you go to Jersey, you can get it done.
Okay, and how would you differentiate somebody who has an infection and somebody who doesn't? And I'm assuming that if you increase your DC current and your electron flow and magnetism, that will help combat infections?
Correct. Yeah, okay. I mean, we see that. What do we know? People that get infected that are in ICUs have way worse infections than anywhere else. But the belief in medicine is because that's where the bad bugs are. My belief is that's where the bad immune systems are created from all the materials that are in those environments.
Mm-hmm. And
so
do you have
completely differently.
Do you have a quick and easy way to differentiate somebody who has an infection, whereas somebody who's just has a bad redox potential or whatever?
Well, I mean, a highly sensitive CRP is one way, but
it's usually low.
There's no one test. There's no one test. Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, there's no test anything in medicine that is definitive. I mean, every test is a battery. You know, you need to have multiple variables to see what the picture is. It's kind of like, you know what you're asking me? You're actually, well, how can I see Van Gogh's Starry Night if you only have white paint? It doesn't make sense.
Right. Okay, and here's the last question. I'm actually going to, can you see your message screen?
Yeah.
Can you order these in the order of most important to least important? They're all important.
Yeah, I would tell you DHA and blue light are
not getting too much blue light. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is circadian rhythm. Number two thing is DHA. Number 3 is blue light exposure. Number 4 is water. Number 5 is sleep, because sleep is the outlier. If your circadian rhythm is good, you're going to sleep good. I would say after that, probably cold, then psychological stress, and then exercise. Exercise would be the last thing on the list.
Very, very interesting. This has been a very, very interesting interview, and I'm happy that you've been able to clarify some bad assumptions and just put me on the way so that I can do my own research and really, see for myself that what you're saying is right. But
I just want you to read some of those things, some of the books that we talked about. I really, that I invited you into that Facebook group, I think it's going to be an eye-opener to you, because these are all people who've been following most of my stuff for 5 years. They're where they were there where you are now, as skeptics. And I told you, I love skeptics. I want you to remain that way. And even if you think I am right 3 or 4 years down the road, I still want you to always question everything that I tell you. And I tell the people on that site the same thing. Why? Because I know that our physical environment, the physics of our environment, constantly change. So I try to pay attention to those things, but I may miss this, that, or the other thing. And I'm not interested in being liked, Mr. Cohen. I'm interested in being correct.
Right. So
and that's the key.
Wonderful. That's why I like you so much, because you're just involved with trying to find out the truth rather than trying to become popular.
No, I'm not. I'm not only that. I don't sell anything. I don't sell supplements. I don't sell a diet. I guess what I do sell is ideas.
Right.
And but I give a lot away for free on my blogs and these podcasts. I mean, look, we've been going for almost 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Right. So, yeah, where can people find you, and what's the name of your book that people could read more?
You can find me on my website. It has a forum, and it obviously associated with the blog. It's www.jackkruse.com. And the book you can find on Amazon. It's called The Epi-Paleo Prescription. You can also find it at Barnes & Nobles. If you do read it, please leave a review. And my new book is, my next 2 books are already done, but I'm not ready to release them yet because I've been doing a movie project, and we're kind of waiting on that. The name of the movie is called Supercharged, and you can find out about that on Facebook. There's already a group that started. I do a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of interviews. I have a media page, which you can go look at. I think the easiest way to approach me, honestly, it cuts through the first 2 or 3 years of the blog, is reading the book and then getting on my forum and asking people who've been with me for a really long time. They will direct you to things for your specific question. But Mr. Cohen, for your information, the easiest way to really pin me down is get on my forum on the Optimal Journals, put your story down. When I know a little bit of your context, then I can give you some pretty pointed advice, kind of like I did with you today. Great. And for your listeners, some may feel comfortable with this, some may not. But I would tell you, go and read the Optimal Journals on my site and be prepared to be astounded by some of the changes that people have made. And sometimes, when you do conventional things and they don't work, and then you give crazy a try, you start to find out that maybe crazy isn't so crazy.
That was exactly my experience. It was just, hey, I in the beginning I viewed things as crazy, and then I was like, but it works. So, thank you very much for talking with me, and have a fantastic day.
All right, you too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.